What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking eForge, and today we are going to be forging a square punch. Now if you've been following along with my recent toolmaking videos, this style of punch follows the same process as the Mark Aspery style round punch. It is just simply square. Now square punches are a niche tool for blacksmiths generally speaking, but are useful for making things like nail headers or things where you need specifically sized square holes in a piece of steel. So without any further ado, let's get out to the shop and let's get rocking.
Alright, first thing I'm going to do here is to forge the hammer end of this punch. Forging a short square taper at the end of this here. This is 4340 round stock. That's what I make all of my punches out of. Pull that taper back toward me just. I don't want this to get too thin, because this is the struck end of the tool. This is where I'm hit it with my hammer. Alright, so next heat, start taking that to an octagon shape, and then I'll punch, or I'll turn in the indexing swell. Alright, take this octagon now, use the flat piece, the flat face of my hammer, even that out. I got a weird torque on it last time. Even that out on all sides. Make sure it's straight. Alright, take that to the horn of the anvil. Next heat, then my hammer, using the rounded side of my hammer to put in an indexing swell. Alright, so now we're going to come to the horn of the anvil, to the round side of my rounding hammer. I'm just going to go ahead and get a nice swell to hold on to with my thumb and forefinger when I'm using the punch. So that I know kind of the orientation of the punch. The intent here is going to be to taper the punch in such a way that the square cross section lines up 90 degrees to this swell. Alright, now that I've got that indexing swell and the hammered in, I'm going to turn this around and go to town on making that square taper all the way down to the punch. Alright, so the goal here is just like I did on the previous end, swap to a lighter hammer, kind of save my arm, is to forge this down to a nice square taper, which is 90 degrees in line with the swell. Just rotating by 90 degrees. I hold this at an angle so that I get a good square taper out of it. I'll forge this tip in before I move on to the rest of the piece. So if I am out of square or out of line with the swell, I can correct that before I pull it all the way back up the piece. Now, this is too cold to keep hammering on. Nope. I'm just doing some what we call blanching to clean up the surface. Now I'm going to check. And yeah, I am out of square by quite a bit. So what I want to do next heat is I want to pull that square cross section this direction, because that's what would be in line with the swell back here. And to do that, I'm going to set this flat on the anvil and then strike at an angle on this corner to bring that corner down, bring it back into square, and then I'll flip it over, do the same thing here, and see how out of square I am on the sides as well. But I want to correct that before I pull that square cross section all the way back up to the swell, so that I'm not trying to correct it all the way down the length and mess myself up. More work now for less work later. So I'm everything on this edge. That down to what I think is going to be square. I'm going to do the same thing on this edge. And I'll check the other edges. Odds are good if I manage to be twisted on one side, I'm twisted all the way around. So. Alright, how do we do? Well, that's much better. This leads up. Start drawing this taper back into the body of the punch. The reason I'm here on the fork is because I got a relatively sharp edge here, and I don't want to hammer that sharp corner into the edge up here as I'm trying to work the taper. Because it swells out on this side, I don't want to mess that up. Have a nice little cut mark in there or something. Something I'd have to fix later, so I've learned from past mistakes. Do some truing up, forge that down to about 1/8 of an inch at the tip, and just kind of make that taper smooth, and then let it cool and do some grinding. I like to do as little grinding as possible. I like to forge it as close as I can to the final dimensions so that I don't have to do as much grinding. Save a little of that time that I can spend on the anvil and other things. Progressively working that taper down to a little bit thinner. Not quite, about to touch this phrase. Bigger than 1/8 of an inch, but not by a ton. There's not a lot of steel that I need to grind off there. I'm going to do some grinding work that makes this thinner anyway. So I'm going to do one more heat, kind of true up everything, make sure everything's straight, and then put my touch mark in. I'm gonna just put a bit of octagon shape up till about where I think the tip is actually gonna be. Just make it a little more comfortable to hang on to. Fire, I'll put my touch mark in and direct that kind of kick off to the side of the tip there, and then it'll be ready for an annealing cycle of heat treatment. some grinding and heat treat it. I'm going to go ahead and round off the end of this and then grind the tip up and flatten things off here and make it look a little nicer before I get to straightening it, because it looks like it's still got a little bit of a curve this direction. So I'm going to straighten that and then heat treat and then do some finish grinding and we'll be done. There's a reason you're seeing me go up and down as I grind on the tip here. I like a little bit of a crown to the hammer end of my punches and stuff because I find it easier to hit. If I've got a rounded face and a rounded face, I can come at it pretty much any angle and I'll usually get a pretty good strike out of it. So I put a little bit of a crown on here and then I grind around the corner to make sure that there's no sharp edges, and that the taper prevents it from mushrooming, but the rounded crown helps that a little bit too because it's not as much area that you're striking as opposed to if it was flat. I don't know how well you can see these colors, but there's a reason I do this heavy grinding and profiling before I heat treat. Because if you can see the colors up here, it's sitting in a nice kind of purpley color, and just back from it is a straw color. And if you see my video talking about oxidation colors, you'll know that that means it's anywhere between, I think it's like 380 to 500 degrees, depending on where you're at on the tip of the punch. And anything above, say 400, 450 degrees, it'll temper the hardness back, and I temper about 450 degrees anyway, so it probably wouldn't damage anything, but if I were to get any hotter, that would be not ideal because it'd make the tip of my punch much softer than what I intend. So I do this heavy grinding with a 60 grit belt to really refine the shape after forging. Then I heat treat, then I come back and do some surface polishing to finish things up. I do that with my knives too, and I generally drill or punch the holes for the tangs beforehand. It looks like the forge is heated up, so I'm gonna get back to this after I do a couple other projects.
Now, if you've been following along with my recent toolmaking videos and specifically watched the round punch or the slot punch videos, the heat treating process is much the same. Specifically, heating this piece of 4140 medium carbon tool steel to dull orange and quenching in water the first ½ inch to inch of the punch, scraping that forge scale off of the tip and letting the residual heat in the punch itself bleed forward to the tip in order to temper it, letting the tempering colors tell me by eye how hot that piece of steel is. The intent is to get the tip of the punch up to about 400 to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and that corresponds to a dull straw color. Then I quench the tip again, repeating the process as many times as possible. This heat treating process eliminates the need to do a separate tempering cycle and results in a strong and durable tool that can be used time and time again. That's gonna do it for today's project. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell. If you want to support me and the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video. And as always, keep on rocking.